Oh, good evening, or good afternoon. We are going to start our next side event, Food and Water Security, Challenges and Outlook for Smart and Inclusive Agriculture. I am very happy to moderate this side event. I'm Yasmin Seguirat and I'm administrator at SIAM. It's an international organization dedicated to cooperation in the agriculture and food sector. And the session today is the topic of the session today is very important because the Mediterranean has long been recognized as a region where water resources are very limited by the climate, of course, and it's increasingly clear that effective and sustainable solutions to these major challenges will require a greater understanding and consideration of the linkage and interdependencies between climate, soils, water, the energy sector, agriculture, of course, demographics issues, and economics. That is why we have today a side event that will gather partners, very important partners of the SIAM. First of all, the Arab Water Council, the Arab Organization for Agriculture Development, the Center for Environment and Development for the Arab region and Europe, and the CME UNOPS. So this side event will have two objectives. First, to demonstrate the importance of putting climate smart solutions into action, of course, illustrating the role of cooperation between international, regional, and local actors, and involving youth, women in the water and food sectors. And the other objective of this meeting is to examine how capacity of stakeholders, of actors, can be developed and measured by key skills like finance and access to support, to network also, harnessing new technologies, smart farming technologies, and digital innovation in building more resilient communities. So very quickly, I will introduce the speakers, and just to tell you that we will have an opening remark by Professor Mahmoud Abu Zaid, which is the president of the Arab Water Council. Then we will have also the opening remarks of Placido Plaza, which is the Secretary General of the SIAM. And then we will have 35 minutes of debate, discussions with Professor Khalid Abu Zaid. He's Senior Regional Water Resource Director of CEDARE. We will have also Dr. Roula Khadra, Scientific Administrator and Water Resource Management Expert in Siambari. Mrs. Blanca Moreno-Dodson, Director of the CMI UNOPS. And finally, Dr. Nisreen Lahem, Agri-Food System Expert at AOAD. So I won't take the floor too much, and I will give the floor to Professor Abu Zaid.
Honorable participants and guests, good afternoon and a warm welcome from the Arab Water Council. Today marks a special panel discussion on the sidelines of COP27, and we are proud to be able to host it here with all of you. Our main focus in this panel session will be on one of the most critical issues addressing the theme of food and water security. Globally, there is a high confidence at present that the negative impacts of future climate change on freshwater systems are expected to outweigh the benefits. Changes in water quality and quantity due to climate change are expected to affect the four pillars of food security, namely food availability, stability, access, and utilization. This is expected to lead to decreased food security and increased vulnerability of poor rural farmers. Climate change negative impacts are already being felt in the form of increasing temperatures, weather variability, shifting agro ecosystem boundaries, envisage crop and pests, and more frequent extreme weather events. On farms, climate change is reducing crop yields, the nutritional quality of major cereals, and lowering livestock productivity. Sustainable investments in adaptation and mitigation measures will be required to maintain current yields and to achieve production and food quality increases to meet demand. The problem also works in reverse. Agriculture is a major part of the climate problem. It currently generates 19 to 29% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Without action, this percentage could rise substantially. The term smart agriculture is a fairly new term, and the majority of farmers are not familiar with what exactly stands behind it. It refers to the usage of technologies like sensors, location systems such as remote sensing, GIS, etc., communication systems based on mobile connection, robots, artificial intelligence on the farm, precision irrigation, and climate management and control in greenhouses, among other technologies. The result from this automated smart farming processes is being precision and 24 hours a day and 7 days a week control, eventually leading to considerable savings in all key resources used. More specifically, climate smart and inclusive agriculture is a new perception involving an integrated approach to managing landscapes, cropland, livestock, forests, and fisheries that addresses the interlinkage challenges of water and food security and accelerating climate change. Climate smart agriculture aims to achieve the triple win of increased productivity, enhanced resilience, and reduced emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, it is vital that responses to climate change must focus on food and water. Addressing water resource management is recognized as a priority and is an indispensable part of reducing vulnerability and promoting adaptation to climate change. A balance between mitigation and adaptation strategies has to be established at policy and program levels so that win-win solutions can be realized. Holistic and multi-sectorial approaches has to be taken when developing adoption strategies. Financing for water-related investments should also be ensured, including infrastructure and technology. Investments in education, capacity building and training with special focus on youth and women may also support the sustainable use of these technologies. In conclusion, international cooperation could be oriented towards prevention and management of specific climate-related risks and vulnerability, supporting investment programs for climate-smart and inclusive agriculture through international financial cooperation, and providing open access to data and statistics to ensure the role of all stakeholders in governance. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to a very fruitful session. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Professor Abu Zaid, for this rich introductory address, and our gratitude for reminding the importance in facing climate change and new solutions to it, of the importance of education and international cooperation. And when this one better? Yeah? Is it okay? So, and when you have mentioned education and international cooperation, you have mentioned SIAM, because this is our nature and the reason why we have been created. I would like to address you my best wishes for a fruitful meeting here. I have myself to attend another one with the ministers of agriculture of the Arab countries. But I want to underline that if we are speaking about smart solutions, we're speaking about innovation, and innovation fluctuates with the experience and the age of the farmer who is at the center of the system. And we have seen this morning in another meeting how young farmers have a different receptibility to innovation, and how innovation and smart, to put it this way, agriculture is an opportunity to make the system more inclusive. We are speaking about youth inclusiveness. Okay, what we are speaking about, crisis and opportunity, evidently it's a huge crisis. Evidently, it is a big opportunity that we cannot miss. And again, Dr. Abu Zaid, as you were mentioning, education and international cooperation will be at the heart of the defeat. So all the best, and I really would like to thank all of you, the Arab Water Council, the CMI, UNOPS, CEDARE, and the OAEID for their presence and their contribution to the organization of this event. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Asido. So I don't have the same problem with the mic because I'm not so tall. So we will start right now the debate, and I will really ask two questions. We will start with the first one. You will have all the opportunity to answer it, and then we will have a second round of questions. So as climate change threatens food and water security in the Mediterranean, what smart solutions can be developed today, and how are stakeholders, in particular young and women, involved in these solutions? I will give the floor first to Professor Khaled Abu Zaid. You have the floor, and I think you have a PowerPoint to show.
Yes, thank you very much. If I may use some of the slides just to illustrate some of the solutions I'm going to talk about. Now, one of the problems of the climate change is sea level rise. and especially in the Mediterranean region, for example, in the southern Mediterranean coasts and the deltas. This is a picture of the Nile Delta in Egypt, the northern part of Egypt, which is in the southern part of the Mediterranean. And the blue color shows the current situation of the Nile Delta that's inundated with water in the lowlands. If there is a 1 meter rise in the water sea level, you will find that 1 meter or 2 meter, this would be the area that would be covered by water in the delta. Of course, this means that there is a loss in agriculture development, there is loss in agriculture production, there is food insecurity, and also seawater intrusion to the groundwater, which may be used for agriculture even in the areas that are not inundated with the sea level rise. Of course, there are efforts that are made to protect against sea level rise, such as those walls on the Rosetta branch of the Nile where it dumps into the sea, which protects a little bit the backland against sea level rise, in addition to shore erosion as well. But there are also some other smart solutions, such as these natural-based solutions using straw to enrich the coastal areas with sand enrichment, sand nourishment, creating sand dunes that can protect against sea level rise when it happens. And this is a big project in the northern delta of Egypt, where also women, you were talking about inclusiveness, women has actually helped in creating those straw walls to create those sand dunes. Of course, there are other climate change vulnerability issues such as droughts and heat waves that affects agriculture. If you look at this graph, for instance, you see that the expected yield on all these crops are actually going to be reduced, and the water demand is going to increase for all these crops by all these amounts. Maybe the only crop, and this here also speaks about smart agriculture and how we should really study the impact on each and every crop, because it may be different from one crop to another. For instance, cotton here, Egyptian cotton, is showing that the yield might increase with the increase in temperature. But of course, there will be an increase in water demand because of the heat wave. The heat waves and the increase in heat temperature. And the heat waves have also sudden impacts, whether it's heat waves or even cold waves as well. They also affect the food production and agriculture production. Of course, there are several adaptation projects. There are several adaptation projects to the water droughts, such as the use of non-conventional water resources, such as the treatment of agriculture drainage. This is also an example from Egypt, Bahr al-Baqar water treatment, agriculture drainage water treatment plant, which is the biggest treatment plant in the world, and it has 3 Guinness records in terms of size and sludge treatment, and also ozone production for disinfection. Wastewater treatment and direct reuse of wastewater treatment also in agriculture development. This is going to be one of the most important adaptation measures. Plus desalination. Although desalination may not be used necessarily for agriculture, but it may be used for urban development that will relieve some of the fresh water that is needed for agriculture. There are several adaptation measures that could be implemented, of course, such as breeding new varieties that are tolerant to high temperature, salinity, and droughts, changing the planting times of the crops according to the weather conditions, choosing the actual proper cropping pattern, confronting extreme events quickly by early and emergency warning systems as well. And here is where also the young can help in developing IT applications that could help with these kind of warnings, and also train the young farmers on using these applications, because they are the ones that can really be included in the use of these new technologies. Supporting scientific and applied research, increasing the number of agro-meteorological stations. In the irrigation sector per se, also techniques such as laser leveling, encouraging planting on terraces, dry methods of irrigation, implementing modern irrigation, using the appropriate amount of water with appropriate quality for the appropriate use of agriculture, especially when we're talking about reuse of treated wastewater. There are specific crops that could be used for each level of treatment. And the conjunctive use also of rain-fed agriculture and improving rain-fed agriculture using groundwater, and also conjunctive use of this with supplemental irrigation from groundwater, where groundwater is actually the natural reservoir for storing rainfall, which would have less impacts than dams and large infrastructure. In the water sector, there are many other, I don't want to take much time, but some of these adaptation measures in the water sector includes building codes that could be renovated, reuse codes also that could be done. And I will stop here for now.
Thank you, very interesting. I will ask the same question to my colleague Rula. So what are the solutions today, the smart solution that you develop, and how are the stakeholders and the young and women involved in particular?
Thank you, Yasmin. I would like just to start saying that historically agriculture has undergone several revolutions. And these several resolutions, as we know, have driven the efficiency, the yield, and the profitability. And actually, our current agricultural system, they are calibrated to increase yield. So to maximize yields, and to maximize yields under ideal conditions, including water availability, including climate conditions that no more apply. So what we actually need, first of all, a change in route. Before talking about techniques, technologies, and solutions, we need a change in route. And this has to bring a transformation that is essential to improve the system capacity to prevent, absorb, and adapt, which is not the case now. And a key property to build this resilience will be diversification. And when we talk about diversification, we are not only talking about production or cropping patterns, but we are also talking about supply chains, a diversification of actors. And this is why we talk about inclusive agriculture. In order to do this, we have to embrace an approach or the model, what we call now WEFE, Water, Energy, Food, Ecosystem Model. Now, another important key of transformation in this perspective, it is what the markets are forecasting. They are forecasting for the next decade a digital agricultural revolution. Now, these innovations, when we are talking about new sensors, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, modeling, computers, these innovations, they have to be complemented by a sound governance in order to minimize the risks of, first of all, negative environmental externalities, and most, the social inequalities. We would like to avoid what we call unequal distribution of benefits that can come from this digital revolution. Why? Because we risk actually to create a divide between urban and rural areas, between individuals, between economies, and between sectors, because not every sector or everybody has, let's say, the same input or has the same access. So we need actually, through international cooperation, as has been already said, and especially through education, and all of this has to be put in a sound governance system to minimize these risks. Now, this means that the technological innovation has to be accompanied with social innovation, and this cannot be done without a financial innovation that has to de-risk the agri-food system and to target the agri-food businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roula. Well, I think we all agree here, and and it's very important the fact that you remind that, or you highlight the fact that inclusiveness is not only, we're not talking about only about stakeholders, but we're talking about stop working in silos, working together, and also interconnecting topics together. And the nexus you mentioned, food, water, is very important. I will ask the same question to Mrs. Blanca Moreno. So, what smart solution can be developed, and smart and inclusive solutions?
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit more macroeconomic and start by stating a bit the magnitude of the challenge before we talk about solutions, because agriculture in the Mediterranean has now is suffering the effects of the three crises. Climate, of course, especially with the water scarcity, conflict because of the dependency on imports coming from Russia and Ukraine, and then COVID, of course, that made the accessibility and the prices of food inputs much higher. In fact, if we look at the prices today, globally speaking, it was during the oil crisis of the 70s, during the Arab Spring, and now that the prices of food have been the highest, and they are higher now than they were in 2011. So you may be wondering, so why is there no social revolution? Well, one of the reasons is that all countries in the Mediterranean, most of them are using measures to prevent these inflationary pressures from going to the citizens. So they are using some subsidies, and this actually has a fiscal cost. And the fiscal cost will need to be repaid, especially in countries that have already very high levels of debt to GDP, in some cases close to 80, 90, and 100%, and Lebanon over 100%. So at the macroeconomic level, a lot of the countries are on the verge of food insecurity because they depend a lot on imports from others. On average, in the MENA region, revenues for food imports represent about 25% of the total export revenues, and in the case of Egypt, it's 50%. So I think the three crises combined are indicating how vulnerable the region is. So that is at the macro level. So the consequences at the micro level, before we talk about solutions, is that we are going to see an increase in poverty, because there were already people experiencing food insecurity before the three crises, and this is going to increase, and we expect the number of poor in the MENA region to go up. So what can be done? There are a lot of things that can be done, and I think that I can only add to what has already been said several things. One of them is that the agriculture models need to be reviewed, because first of all they need to adapt to the water scarcity. We cannot promote anymore that the farmers grow very water intensive products. And how do you do that? Because if a farmer is used to growing the same for years, how do you make the farmers aware of the fact that water is not available in the same way as it was before? So they need some incentives. They will switch if they're going to make more money producing something else. But for that, you need some government action, and the action doesn't need to come on the production level, doesn't need to come only in terms of the global public goods, like the governments need to continue investing in agriculture extension, making irrigation more easier and more accessible, but they also need to have some provide some incentives for the farmers to switch. And also, we have talked already about inclusive agriculture. I would say local agriculture, because a lot of the models in the MENA region have been oriented towards exports. And some of those in Jordan, in Morocco, some of these food items that are being, agriculture products that are being exported, they are also water consuming. So the switch is not easy, and the governments have to invest more in global public goods like agriculture extension, irrigation, but also provide some incentives for the production to switch. And the other side of the equation is the consumption. I think that on the consumption side, the governments have to provide some incentives to switch consumption towards, of course, healthier foods, Mediterranean foods that protect the ecosystems and also encourage the health of the citizens and also absorb more CO2. So we're talking about agroforestry. So this switch has to happen, and the incentives have to be given on both sides, both on the production and on the consumption. So maybe I'll stop there because I lost track of time. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Blanca, and thank you for highlighting this very important context, of course. Yes, and what we were mentioning about it is important because today we are much more talking about food systems, agri-food systems, and when we have this framework, we put together issues related to production, to consumptions, and to the necessary transitions. So thank you to put together these issues. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Nisreen Laham. Same question. What smart solution is AOADA developing?
Thank you, Yasmin. First of all, I'd like to thank Siam and Siam Bari for inviting the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development, or AOD, to take part in this important session. And congratulations for the organizers of this session, Siam Bari, mainly our Dr. Rula Khadra, Yasmin, and the team. Referring to your question on the innovative solutions or smart solutions in the Mediterranean region, smart solutions have to deal with the context of the region and the main challenges it faces. Most importantly, water scarcity, mentioned by Dr. Khalid, and impacts of climate change, drought, and land degradation. As we all know, desertification is widely expanding in the Mediterranean region as desert ecosystems are highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change. And desert farming face real challenges such as poor soil, water salinity, drought, high temperatures, dependence on non-renewable water aquifers, and limited access to inputs and outputs of agricultural products. So from here, the AOD has adopted a new approach, which is integrated desert farming, dealing with specific technologies and innovations to tackle these challenges in the region. These innovations, such as, first of all, using non-conventional water resources, such as water harvesting and reuse of water or sewage water. Also using alternative sources of energy and energy efficiency. Promoting new crops tolerant for salinity and drought, and adopting the circular economy approach by recycling the byproducts of the agricultural sector. We have to promote these innovations to smallholder farmers mainly, and here it's the role of the agricultural extensions, how we can include these farmers, give them incentives, as mentioned also by our colleague here. But another point I want to raise is although technology is important and very important to transfer to smallholder farmers, farmers possess valuable knowledge on agricultural practices, on water management, on crop varieties. This indigenous knowledge is can be easily promoted in the region and upscaled. What is needed maybe is to connect this indigenous knowledge to the scientific knowledge, how we can work together with research centers, scientific people with this local knowledge that can be also transformed all over the region. And the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development is intending to do some mapping for these small-scale solutions on ground level that can be promoted all over the region. The people in the region, the farmers, know the context they are working in, know what is most beneficial for them, what solutions are there. But we have to make use of these solutions, and we have to upskill them and map their impact on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Referring to what Dr. Rula has mentioned also of transforming the agriculture, the agri-food systems through the whole value chain and promoting it to the grassroots level through participatory approaches, how we can involve them in this integrated desert farming approach to design, to test this approach and to promote it. So we have to work together from top-down and bottom-up approach in order to promote all these good practices throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisreen. We have to work together. So you are offering me the transition to the second question. So we are all here actors involved in the Mediterranean region, and the context is really calling for a more stronger cooperation between actors. So in your opinion, very quickly, how can cooperation support smart, inclusive agriculture, and in particular, what and where investment would be needed? If you can answer to this question. I will start with, I don't know if Professor Khalid, Professor Mahmoud, you would like to answer to this question first? The investments and the cooperation.
Well, we talked about smart agriculture and inclusive agriculture, holistic approaches, and all these initiatives will require specific investments. And that means that in the future, if we have to involve and include those actions, the governments has to put more money, and the private sector should invest more so that we can realize the objectives of them. So, of course, when we talk about investment and inclusive agriculture, we need to consider cooperation also, cooperation among different players. That is something which we should not overlook, as was mentioned, the investment in other sectors beside the inclusive agriculture and smart agriculture, like the education, for example, and the capacity building and so on. Thank you.
Absolutely, Professor. And we are very happy, talking about cooperation, to have this collaboration with the Arab Water Council and the investments we are working together on, in particular in research and education activities. Same question for Blanca.
Thank you. I think that it has already been said that we need to look at the nexus food, water, energy, and ecosystems. And I think that if we compare this scope with the previous ones, I think that the place of food is much more emphasized. I don't know if I'm wrong, but that's my perception. It's the first time that food is recognized as one of the dimensions directly associated to climate change, but we don't want to make the mistake of treating it in isolation from the other sectors. I think it's essential that we focus on the nexus and that the solutions are found around that nexus. That's number one. Number two, we are hearing all week, I've been here about the trillions that need to be invested, particularly in vulnerable areas that are affected by climate change. I think this is the time to rethink agriculture investment and to allocate the funds that are needed to protect the rural areas, to protect the ecosystems, to prevent the exodus to urban areas, and to enhance food security. So I think that, like it's being done in other sectors, concretely in the energy sectors, I think more effort needs to be put into the preparation of good projects that would attract funding and investment. And we know that the funding is going to come if we manage to attract the private sector from the private sector, but we also need a catalytic capital that will come from the multilaterals and sometimes guarantees. To make sure that the project is viable. And preparing these projects also, as Professor said, requires capacity building, because with the uncertainties of climate, it's more difficult to prepare good projects now, because you don't want to prepare a project that then in 2 years you have to review it, restructure because of a disaster. And it's hard to anticipate disasters due to climate. We've seen it this summer. So what to do? You have to build in the projects, the climate contingencies, and the flexibility that would allow you to move forward. But I think this is the time to allocate more importance and more money to the agriculture sector, but again, in this comprehensive way. We cannot say food without looking at the linkages with water, energy, and biodiversity. And in that way, I think we would be able to attract more funding, because I think that collaboration is needed, research is needed, knowledge, technology, all this is needed, but we also need money. We need investment. And that, I think this is the opportunity to put the agriculture sector at the center of this climate COP. Thank you.
Yes, from my point of view also, I would like to mention that climate, if we're talking about cooperation, climate change is transboundary. We have to realize that it's transboundary, and therefore we have to look at it from a transboundary point of view, especially when we come to transboundary water resources. If you look at this map, for instance, it shows the rainfall pattern on the Nile Basin, with Egypt being the most downstream country on the Mediterranean, and it's not receiving any rainfall. The blue color shows the rainfall, and you can see that Egypt depends mainly on the drainage of this rainfall through the Nile River. So if we want to look at the climate change impact on the renewable resources of Egypt, we should look at the climate change impacts on the upper Nile outside the boundaries of Egypt. So this requires cooperation between, for this example, 11 countries that are sharing the Nile Basin. Cooperation on any infrastructure that may be built on those transboundary rivers. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam during the construction, before it started to be filled. This is a picture of it when it starts to be filled by only 6% of its huge 74 billion cubic meters capacity. We need to have cooperation between the countries to look at the impacts of climate change on the renewable resources, and also on the management of these transboundary water resources, on the research and development and the scientific analysis of the future forecasts of something like the Blue Nile, which is where this dam is being built. And you can see the gap in the knowledge on the future forecasts. It shows that the discharge of the Blue Nile ranges between negative and positive. It's not for sure yet, so we have to really cooperate on research and development on the forecasts of the climate change impacts. So there need to be cooperation on transboundary water management. We need to study the transboundary water, energy, food, climate, ecosystem nexus of water resources development and agriculture development projects together, because not only at the national level but also at the transboundary level, because you may be generating energy in a country upstream but reducing food production in a country downstream, or the other way around, or things like that. So we need to look at all this. We need to support the development of national and regional strategies for water reuse. We need to be looking in the future, especially in water scarce countries and drought situations, at water recycled based agriculture. We need to really develop those strategies and policies. And also we need to look at the cooperation between the international and regional organizations on developing those smart agriculture practices. And here I would like to announce this report that will be published in the next session here somewhere on climate smart agriculture in Egypt, which is a cooperation between SIDARI and the FAO and other organizations. And such cooperation in looking at what are the practices of smart agriculture that need to be studied and replicated from one country to another, and the exchange of experience is very important. We also need to develop regional policies for food trade, for virtual water trade. My colleague here was talking about the import of some countries and dependency on imports. Egypt rightly is importing about 50 billion cubic meters of water per year, which is equivalent to the Nile water that is using. So it needs another Nile in order to be self-sufficient, for instance. The whole Arab region is importing about 350 billion cubic meters of water in virtual water, in food only. So we need to develop policies around that to maximize the benefits and the optimization of what need to be cultivated locally, what need to be imported from outside if it's water intensive and it's a drought or water scarce countries, to look at these options. Of course, the exchange of experience, cooperation on developing treated wastewater reuse codes, and also promoting the investment, as I mentioned, in wastewater and agriculture drainage reuse for agriculture development. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaled. Okay, a lot has been said. I will not be long. I just would like to underline the fact that you don't want to create another divide talking about smart agriculture, digital agriculture, and smart systems. And afterward, after 10 years, starting talking about, mainstreaming youth and gender into agriculture. Yes, agriculture is becoming more attractive to young people, but we have to take into account the digital divide. It does not have to be accentuated. This is one. And this is why, as you very well know, Yasmin, we invest in youth. And this is what we do. We can talk about social innovation, which is very important, about incentives in agriculture, very important, especially about having the private sector on board. When we talk about smart agriculture, preventive agriculture, collection of data, we have to be democratic also about the use of data and information, and there we need also the private sector to take into account the stakeholders, the actors, while building the smart tool or the smart solution. We have to prepare the rural areas, so we have to start from investing in youth at all levels. This is what SIAM does.
Yeah, many points were highlighted, but I believe the first point for collaboration between different stakeholders is knowledge sharing. And digital platforms can play a great role in sharing knowledge. AOD is developing a digital knowledge hub to share knowledge on best practices. And this digital hub can be a platform for collaboration as well. Collaboration, north-south collaboration with credible entities like SIAM, where we can have the best practices for the Mediterranean region, also applied in MENA region, in other countries, in Arab countries. We can also have South-South collaboration with regional platforms such as SIDARI and the Arab Water Council, how we can transfer best practices also on regional level. Another dimension for collaboration for this platform is the Arab-African collaboration. And while we are talking now, there's another session convened by the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development with our partners, CGR and others, on how can we promote food security on regional level between the Arab and African continents, and how we can boost the agricultural development and food security through trade and investment, trade between the Arab and African countries, and investment in agricultural investment, where we have many issues to collaborate on and exchange. An important dimension of this digital hub is the inclusiveness of women and youth, as they are the agents for change. We need to have financial inclusive models for women. Women have to have support on financial level. But how we can do this? We have to, as we promote the best practices to farmers and capacitate their building capacities, we have also to work with financial institutions and develop their capacities on WEFNEX's approaches, on best case practice, agricultural practices, to have these inclusive financial models where women can get ease loans, where they can boost their small agricultural businesses. It's our role to connect these dots between science, between the private sector, financial institutions, and intergovernmental organizations like AOD. We have to work hand in hand to connect all these dots to promote the women, specifically women agribusiness, in a transformative way, how we can make the agricultural sector attractive for new generations, taking into consideration how the agricultural sector could be or should be in the future with the digital transformation or the digital revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very, very interesting answers, and thank you so much, because all your interventions were very complimentary. So we have 5 minutes, I think. I am not sure we have time for question and answer, but we remain here in the pavilion so we can discuss and answer to all your questions. What we have to keep in mind, of course, is that digital innovation, digital transition shouldn't create new gaps, in particular for women and youth in rural areas. And perhaps the best way, the best domain to invest in is, of course, training, capacity building, research, and education. I will perhaps just ask you, each of you, if you had one really short key message. We have time for questions? Okay, sorry. So, please, Raoul, you can ask your question. Sorry, I thought we didn't have time.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you.
Very much. Raúl Compés, the director of CIAN in Zaragoza. It's a pleasure. Two questions, one in particular for Blanca and the rest for the other. You have mentioned the necessity of a switch, a change in the supply, a change in the demand. And my question is, do you think that we need to change in globalization? Because after the Uruguay Agreement and the WTO organization, it seems that the food market globalization has been the big trend. But you have mentioned before that maybe some models oriented to the export are not the best in this new time of crisis. What do you think? We need more globalization.
I need an hour to respond.
I know that. Sure. Or yes. Less globalization. Or we have to move towards the time before Uruguay round, where national policies were more protectionist, looking for more auto-sufficiency. This is one question. If I have time, Second, if not, only one.
I'll try to
Thank you very
respond very quickly. No, I think the answer is not more protectionism. I think the answer is actually to reinforce the agro-food global value chain. And a lot of the free trade agreements between the North and the South did not include agriculture. So that's one of the things that we need to look at, because the potential to trade among each other is undermined because there are still tariffs and non-tariff barriers. But the point I made about exports is that exports should not be encouraged to the detriment of food security. I'm not against exports. I think trade needs to happen in the region for the region to grow like other blocks, like the Asian bloc. But what I was saying is that the food dependency on specific products, in particular, that are like wheat, represents more than double in the consumption diet of the Mediterranean than the rest of the world. So to depend so much for some basic foods is not a good idea, because then you are subject to vulnerabilities. That's what I was saying. So ideally, the models should take into account both, and this is already very long answer, sorry.
I have another question, so Damia, please.
Yeah, very quick question. I know that we are running out of time. It's just that, I mean, the interventions were very interesting, but I still have one missing point, because, I mean, the missing point is adoption and appropriation. I mean, many of the incentives that were talked about are the ones that are coming from the state. And when we hear ourselves, sometimes, I'm just explaining my point, is that I have seen some models where we are much more proactive into putting strategies and then trying to implement them with the people. But I have seen also models that are from very developed countries that are co-constructing. So it's not implementation at the end, but actually it is co-constructing of the innovation from the beginning within the stakeholders. And at this moment, the innovation, I mean, you are not even asking who's gonna pay for the innovation. The innovation is already paid off from the private sector that is already interested in a specific innovation, and there we could have the accelerators, the incubators, etc., and they are already themselves asking for it. And I think it's very successful. I know that there are innovation and investment that are different. Some are that should be taken by public, but not all. And when I see specifically the model in the even in my country, in Morocco, or in other countries, it's much more based on what we have as perception of innovation, and then we try to transmit it to the other categories. So I'm believing in the co-construction of the innovation. I'm believing also that the clusters should be made from the beginning, and this is the best way to make it sustainable. Otherwise, once you are stopping the incentives, when you are stopping the ads, everything is just crumbling all what is constructed. So if you have any opinion of that, thank you.
I will be brief, but this is what I was saying, that what we need, it is a very sound governance system. And this very sound governance system, part of it is the private sector as well, that has to build the idea together. This is what I just said, the stakeholders and the actors, and not to contextualize, actually. And when we talk about incentives, the incentives are about the de-risking of the sector, of the food sector or ag-food sector. This is how it has to work, and this is what is actually foreseen when we talk about the WEFE model. Okay, so innovation is a technological innovation, social and financial innovation, where you have the social part, the inclusiveness, and the private sector working, all of them together. And these are these are preconditions to the incentives. And this doesn't mean that you have to rely actually on the government on the long run. We are talking a lot about including the private sector, especially when it comes to digital agriculture, in order to democratize the information and the data.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Now the meeting is ending for real. And I just wanted to thank you again, all of you, and looking forward to deepen all this discussion and work together. Thank you so much.